everybody. Welcome to That Dang Dad. My name is Phil. The other night I decided to treat myself to a cigar. I took it out on the porch and I enjoyed it during a beautiful summer thunderstorm. And it got me thinking back to when I was smoking a lot of cigars with my guy friends in my teens and 20s. Cigar smoking is one of my clearest memories as a cisgendered man being taught how to do manliness by other cis men. See, there's a lot of ceremony that goes into cigar smoking. First, you need to cut the cigar. You could use your teeth, but that's a little gauche. You should be using a cutter. Then you have to toast the cigar a little bit to get it ready. Then you light the cigar, preferably with a match instead of a lighter. Some of the cigar dads said that the proper cigar smoking pace was no more than 1 or 2 strong puffs every minute. When you were done, you gently laid the cigar in the ashtray. You never stubbed it out. A cigar is a work of art. It must be respected.
Now you're a man, a man, now you're a man.
As a teen, I took cigar ceremony very seriously because the people that had taught me how to smoke a cigar were my friends' older brothers that used to invite us to their poker nights. And I just very badly wanted to be worthy of that invite. I wanted to be sophisticated and worldly. I wanted to be a man.
Oh, yeah.
I was raised with many other lessons in manliness, too. For example, I grew up religious, so I learned that the man is the head of the household, the spiritual leader. He's responsible for making the big decisions in his family, and he's responsible for the spiritual development of his family.
Oh, yeah.
From my dad, I learned that a real man always showed up early, always left late, always offered to help out. And from him I learned that when you drop a girl off at her house, you always wait and make sure that she gets inside before you drive away. From my time in martial arts and law enforcement, I learned that men were protectors, that being a man meant being ready and willing to do violence to protect what was yours. Law enforcement and religion taught me that the guilty needed to be punished, that a real man wasn't afraid to put the fear of God into people doing evil. Real men should intimidate bad guys, hurt them, maybe even kill them. If the law was too lenient, sometimes a man had to take matters into his own hands to do what was right. I learned that men had to suffer quietly. They had to show calm in the face of danger. They had to be the rock when everyone else was freaking out. I learned that some men couldn't hack it in dangerous professions, that they were weak for not being able to do violence, for needing therapy. One of the most influential trainers I ever had in law enforcement told me that any man unwilling to carry a gun everywhere that he went in civilian life was a sheep. From both my dad and law enforcement, I learned that men show affection through teasing, through annoying each other, mean jokes, antagonizing each other. I learned that if a man didn't make fun of you, it meant that he didn't really like you. And thus, to show other men that I liked them, I learned to rib them. However, from my dad and my favorite sergeant, I learned that real men were leaders who should always support their subordinates and make them look good. I learned that a real leader takes all the blame and none of the credit for his team's performance. Leadership is a servant position. From conservative talk radio, I learned that being a man meant being rational, detached, logical, calculating. I learned that being a man meant being able to make the tough choices, the hard decisions. Being a man meant hardening your heart against sob stories and emotional manipulation. A real man did what was best for his family and for his country, even if that meant others had to suffer. Real men did what was necessary. And look, I know my experience is not universal. However, I've known many cis men in the United States. We've all shared at least a few of these life lessons. And I know a lot of cis dudes have had it much worse than I did. My father's a kind, generous person who never roughed me up or psychologically abused me to toughen me up like other dads have done. And you can see a lot of different lessons threaded through my experience, some of them good, some of them not so good. You and I might even disagree on which of those were good lessons or not. And while I think that's an interesting question, I'm also extremely interested in the manliness lessons that I was never taught. For example, during my teens and early 20s, I was never taught that a man must always obtain enthusiastic consent for any sexual contact with someone else. I mean, it was sort of an unstated given that men who jumped out of the bushes and raped people were monsters and needed to be punished, but I never had a single man in my teens or 20s tell me or even acknowledge that having sex with a drunk girl was rape. I never had a single man in my youth tell me that real men sought therapy and medication, that it wasn't weak to have depression or anxiety or other mental illnesses. In my youth, I never had men explicitly tell me that real men were allowed to quit something that was bad for their mental health. I never had men in my youth tell me that real men were allowed to be unconfident or unsure, that they were allowed to experiment sexually without shame, they were allowed to explore gender nonconformity without fear, that real men could wear makeup if they wanted, that real men could be proud stay-at-home dads if it made sense, that real men could be part of polyamorous relationships and let their partners date other people without jealousy, that real men didn't need to protect or possess or defend or assault anything to be a real-ass, valid-ass man. Now, I'm not saying that many men in my life didn't believe those things, but it was never part of the training of being a man. It was never part of the curriculum. And even if the men in your life accepted it, I don't know that many men in my youth would have celebrated those things as real masculinity. I also want to avoid one of the obvious traps that comes out of this discussion, the idea that there's such a thing as a real man, the idea that masculinity needs to be defined by who's in and who's out, who's following the rules, who's acting unmanly. Speaking as a cisgendered man, I give absolutely zero thought as to what makes a real man. I give a lot of thought as to what makes a good man, a kind man, a just man. If you tell me you're a man, great, I believe you. Just don't be a dick. And I realize that puts me a little at odds with a dominant culture that wants to kind of put everybody in their little gender boxes. Blue for boys, pink for girls, invisible for non-binary people. You know, and maybe strictly defined gender boxes make you feel more comfortable too. And if that's true, just go on a little tiny imagination vacation with me for a second. What would happen to society if we stopped rigidly defining man and woman, and we just stopped caring about it? What harms would befall us? And to be fair, I can think of at least 3 awful things that would happen if we stopped caring about rigidly defining gender. The first one's obvious. It would cause worker productivity to rise over time while wages stagnate and concentrate vast wealth in fewer and fewer hands, condemning the working class to a life of increased precarity. Okay, well, maybe not that one, but for sure a thing that would happen would be that 100 corporations would pollute the earth so badly that global temperatures would rise, eroding coastlines and creating a climate refugee crisis as formerly arable land became completely unable to support farming and herding. Okay, well, maybe that's not a gender thing either, but I saved the most serious societal harm for last. If our society stopped rigidly policing what made a man and what made a woman, Now, I realize this is something of a bait and switch from the stated topic of my video, but it's something that I think about as I'm raising my daughter. Like, what life lessons would I give her that I wouldn't also give to my hypothetical son? Or what would I tell that son that I wouldn't tell my daughter? Consent stuff? Spoiler alert, women can rape too. Women can violate consent too. So yeah, I'm going to be talking to my daughter about consent stuff. The fact that there's no shame in being sick, needing medication, treatment, or therapy, I'd say that's pretty gender neutral. How to be a servant leader? I hope my daughter grows into a strong, conscientious leader. I mean, literally the only thing that I wouldn't impart to my daughter is how to check yourself for testicular. Seriously though, whether my daughter grows up to be a cisgendered woman, a trans man, a non-binary person, any other gender expression that serves her, I want her to be thoughtful, helpful, caring, kind, loving, courageous, and just. If I had a son, I'd want the exact same journey for him. And as your cyber dad, I want the exact same journey for you. Maybe someone told you that real men needed to be tough, stoic, and ready to do violence? No. You can be gentle, you can cry, you can seek peace and practice de-escalation. Maybe you think a real man needs to make lots of money and be a feared boss and have a big house. Not true. You can have a tiny apartment, you could need government assistance to feed your family, and you can still feel like you have value. You don't have to have big, strong muscles or own a gun to be a real man if you don't want to. And in my opinion, you don't actually have to worry about what a real man is or does. Just treat people around you real good. Yeah? Yeah.
Now you're a man.
So what do you think? Did I oversimplify this? Did I fail to consider some load-bearing aspect of gender policing in society? Go ahead and let me know in the comments. Just don't be gross. Thank you for spending time with me tonight. Go ahead and give that like button a tippy tap if you enjoyed what you saw. Subscribe if you haven't. And I really hope that you and your friends and your family are doing well and staying healthy during the plague times. And those of you participating in the protests, stay safe. Admire what you're doing. Keep it up. Give them hell. Anyway, thanks again. I appreciate your time, and I'll catch you next time. Good night.